I just want to pay tribute to my little vehicle inspector, Nancy, the cat. He passed away during the week from an illness, and he'll be sorely missed around the garage and the cars. He was always checking them out. He'd sit up on top of them when they came home from a trip warm. He was the first one there to check any of the new cars when we arrived back with them on trailers from Germany.
What do you think, Nance? Yeah? Why again? He'll
be sorely missed, so here's to Nancy.
Carrying on with connecting up the engine in Chewy, I just started doing the things that were really simple and obvious to start narrowing down the number of things to connect. So that's the vacuum hose. It comes off a little pump on the back of the alternator and goes onto the servo on the brakes. The Charade uses loads of these little spring clips that are very easy to use. I'm using a little bit of lubricant there to protect a few bits that are a little bit rusty. The next pipe I'm going to connect is the main fuel inlet from the fuel filter into the injector pump. And I'm glad to be reminded that the fuel filter housing has a manual pump which will help me to prime the diesel into the Charade again when it comes to starting up. This is just a bolt for the routing of the wiring loom around the back of the engine bay, keeping everything tidy. I just moved it down below that lip because I didn't spray below that, so I just pushed these wires out of harm's way. Now there's quite a tangle of wires and cables here. That's a simple one. That's the speedo cable that comes from the gearbox. I think that's the bonnet pull cable. There's some relays, I think. There's a section that's relevant to the battery. I think those are actually wires that should go around the back of the engine to the alternator. And we get it all out where I can see it. That's some tape I put on the differential housing to stop paint going in where the inner CV slots into place. Just sticking to the approach of do the simple stuff first and everything will fall into place eventually. I'll do the speedo cable there, that's a really obvious one. The knurled cap that it goes through can be mostly tightened by hand and then a little squeeze from the pliers. It matches up with the grooves on it quite easily. That's a little rubber grommet there from a brake pipe. I'm just putting back into position. Had it out so that the paint could go around it. There's a little bolt here that holds up a couple of relays, I think they are. Bit of lubricant on that as well to protect the threads. Once you start laying out the loom, you can figure out where things are starting to correspond. I did have a sneaky look back at my own engine removal video to make sure I was putting these in the right place. This is where the hot water comes out of the engine to go to the heater radiator inside in the car. Again, bit of lubricant to protect the clip. These are very handy. I hope they're still tight enough. I'm going to have to observe all these when I start running water through the car again and make sure they're not leaking. Can switch to Jubilee clips then to tighten things up if needs be. This is the clutch cable bracket. I left all the bolts in place on all these things, so I'm doing pretty well at finding all the originals, keeping things tidy. Think I'll check that out. there's always a danger that the release bearing could slip when you're fitting in a gearbox, but all seems to be well. Just fit that little plate then that protects the flywheel. It's just an observation plate really, and it allows the bell housing to slip off it, but it shelters it then when it's in place. There's 3 little bolts in that, one right at the back. I'm glad they didn't have 2 back there, and I got that one tightened with a bit of a reach, and then the 2 on the front. Okay, back around the back. I think this is the fuel return hose from the injector pump. That's a small source of vacuum pipe coming from that little pump on the back of the alternator. That clips onto a little valve there. Now, a few wires that go to the front of the engine. This one connects onto the thermostat housing. That probably turns on and off the fan. Then there's a little temperature gauge one on top. There's another connector on the front of that housing, and the wire had separated from the original connector there. So I went to my trusty box of supplies from eFox Engineers, and I cleaned back the wire and using a vice grip crimped on a new connector. Must get a decent crimping tool sometime. This was a little bit big as well, so I had to tighten it a little bit so that it would slot on. Just rerouted it there a little bit more tidily. Okay, that's that lot. There's a little support bracket for them there. And this cluster goes all around the back and up to the alternator. That one actually goes on to the injector pump. Then there's 3 wires go to this, which is the glow plugs. The 2 rings connect to the bar that goes along them all, and then the other is isolated from them and connects on with an 8mm nut. This is the throttle cable. It works very much like the brake cables on a bicycle. And is held on by a bolt on top of the head. That's the heavy cable to the alternator. The lighter ones are through a plug. The small ratchet is very useful in these tight little places. There's a little bracket to keep those wires out of trouble as they go around the back of the engine. And then that's a connector onto the starter motor, and then the heavy wire there. That's nice and shiny still. Its rubber cover obviously did its job during the first half of the lifetime of this car. One of the last of these smaller things to connect up around the engine bay is this pipe, which I think is the one out of the heater in the interior. Now I'll need the main part of the cooling system, the radiator.
I might be going for a slightly patinated look in the engine bay, but this would be ridiculous, so I gotta give this a bit of a clean up before I put it back in. I might even treat Chewy to a new radiator in the near future. One of these bolts is even sheared, so it's not being triangulated, so I better drill that out and put another one in.
I'd say this isn't the original radiator from the car, because there's evidence of damage to it and no signs of anything like that on this car. The guy we bought the car off had a couple of them, so he probably interchanged a few parts to make up a good one. And he was actually very helpful with a few spares that we needed, such as wings and a bonnet. I'll drill out that sheared nut, but I think I will look for a replacement radiator because there seems to be a few brackets and things missing from this, and I'd like Chewy to be as original as possible and not to have any rattles. I'm using an old tap set just to clean out the threads there. I've got to make use of all the fixing places that are left on this radiator. That's good, that's working there. So just putting a bit of penetrating oil on the back of the screws that hold on the fan motor. Put a bit of weight into releasing those. And then do the delicate work up on top of the toolbox. There's some quite delicate clips holding on the cabling there. It'll be nice if they survive, but a tie wrap will easily replace them if needs be. It's a tight fit, that, but it does slip out. Out with the grinder again and the wire wheel, and I'll start cleaning up that fan housing, which looks very raw. Came up quite well. On my next project, I'll try and be a bit more disciplined about reconditioning everything as it comes off the car, because these little jobs are a real slowdown on the home straight. There's a few steel brackets on the radiator that also need a bit of a clean up. I gave them a zinc prime. I'll give them a top coat of a matte black enamel and leave them to dry. I'll fit these in my next video when I hope to try and start the engine. Thanks for watching.
Are you checking out Moby, Nancy? Right. And what do you think? A bit of work to do? Come on out. Thanks for checking it out, Nance. Yeah, there's some birds there worth chasing, I'd say.